If you grew up in church, you were probably told the Bible isn't just spiritually true, it's factually true. Not metaphor, not poetry, reality. But here's the uncomfortable question almost nobody asks out loud. What happens when ancient certainty collides with modern evidence? Because some biblical claims don't just feel old, they directly contradict everything we now know about the universe, the human body, and our own history. And yet, they're still taught, still preached, still defended. Not because they're true, but because questioning them threatens something much bigger. Tonight, we're looking at 8 biblical claims that simply don't survive modern science. And by the end, you might realize this isn't about attacking faith, it's about understanding why certain ideas refuse to die. The Earth is only a few thousand years old. For centuries, people were taught this with absolute confidence, not as a symbolic story or a loose tradition, but as literal history. The universe, they were told, was only a few thousand years old. Humanity appeared almost immediately after creation, placed into a finished world with a clear beginning and an even clearer authority behind it. There was no deep past to question, and no long unfolding process to wrestle with. Everything had a start date, a sequence, and a purpose. That certainty mattered because it made reality feel small, ordered, and morally controlled. But modern science did not politely disagree with this idea. It did not suggest small corrections, it erased it completely. When scientists learned how to measure time itself, the story collapsed. Radiometric dating revealed that the Earth was not thousands of years old, but billions. Ice cores pulled from the poles preserved seasonal layers, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, recording climates long before any human memory. Tree rings quietly counted time 1 year at a time, reaching further into the past than any written record ever could. And then there was starlight, light traveling across space for millions and even billions of years before reaching Earth. If the universe were only a few thousand years old, that light would not exist yet. We would be staring into darkness. Instead, the night sky is filled with ancient light, telling us we are looking not just across space, but deep into time. The conclusion is unavoidable. The Earth is not young. It is ancient beyond anything early humans could have imagined. Humanity did not arrive at the beginning of the story. We arrived very late. And this is where the tension begins to surface. Because if the timeline is wrong, not slightly wrong, but fundamentally wrong, then what else might be? Time is not a small detail. It is the foundation of the creation narrative itself. Once you accept deep time, creation stops looking like a single dramatic moment and starts looking like a slow, indifferent process. Stars form and die, continents drift. Species appear, change, and disappear. No pause for humanity, no announcement, just emergence. And when that realization settles in, the idea of instant creation begins to crack. Not emotionally at first, but logically. And once logic breaks through, the crack widens on its own. Because if the world was not made quickly for us, then perhaps it was not made with us in mind at all. Humans were created fully formed. The biblical image of human creation is simple, clean, and deeply comforting. Humans appear fully formed, intelligent, moral, and distinct from everything else that exists. There is no trial and error, no gradual becoming. One moment we are not here, and the next we stand complete, made in the image of something higher, separate from animals, separate from nature, separate from the rest of the living world. That idea does more than explain where we came from. It tells us who we are supposed to be. But biology tells a much messier story, a story without ceremony, without a finish line. When scientists began to study life at the genetic level, they did not find evidence of sudden arrival. They found continuity. Humans share DNA with every living thing on Earth, not symbolically, literally. The same molecular language runs through plants, insects, mammals, and us. The differences are not absolute, they are variations on a theme. Even more unsettling, our genes carry ancient viruses, remnants of infections that entered the bodies of our ancestors millions of years ago and became permanent residents in our DNA. They serve no divine purpose. They make sense only if life has been copying, modifying, and improvising for an unfathomably long time. Our bodies themselves tell the same story. Structures that no longer serve a clear function, nerves that take inefficient paths, features that work, but only in ways that reveal they were not designed from scratch. Evolution does not demand belief. It leaves fingerprints everywhere, in fossils, in genetics, in anatomy. The evidence does not argue, it accumulates. And the truly disturbing part is not that humans evolved. That idea alone can be fascinating, even beautiful. The disturbing part is what evolution removes. It removes the idea that we were created apart from nature. It places us inside it, subject to the same forces, bound by the same constraints, no special exemption. No sharp boundary where animals end and humans begin, just gradual change over time. And once that boundary dissolves, an uncomfortable question appears. If we were not created above nature, why were we told we were? What purpose did that separation serve? Because that belief did more than elevate humanity. It justified dominance, authority, and control. And following that question does not lead to comfort. It leads somewhere far more unsettling, where certainty gives way to responsibility, and identity is no longer handed down, but discovered. A global flood reset humanity. This story is almost always taught as history, not as allegory or metaphor. A global flood that wiped the slate clean. Water covering the entire earth, every mountain submerged. Every civilization erased, except one obedient family chosen to survive. The message is clear and dramatic. Humanity failed, judgment came, and only obedience was spared. For many people, this is not presented as a symbolic lesson but as a literal event that shaped the world we live in today. But geology tells a very different story. When scientists read the Earth the way they read a book, the pages do not show evidence of a single worldwide flood. Rock layers form slowly, over immense periods of time, and they preserve clear sequences. They do not show one massive watery interruption covering the entire planet all at once. Instead, they show countless local floods, regional disasters, and gradual changes repeating again and again across deep time. History tells the same story of contradiction. Civilizations in places like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China did not suddenly disappear and restart. Their records continue uninterrupted through the period when the flood is said to have occurred. Kings ruled, crops were harvested, cities expanded, life went on. There is no global gap, no shared reset point, no universal catastrophe written into human memory across all cultures. Then there is the biological problem, which becomes impossible to ignore. Animals could not have traveled from a single boat to every corner of the planet in a short span of time. Isolated species on distant continents make sense only if they evolved where they are found. The distribution of life follows geography and time, not a rapid post-flood migration. What matters most is that the evidence is not missing. It is present, abundant, and consistent, and it does not support the claim. It contradicts it directly, so the question becomes unavoidable. Why does the story persist so strongly? Because the flood is not just about water. It carries a powerful moral message. Obedience leads to survival. Disobedience leads to erasure. Order is preserved through submission. That message reinforced authority in a chaotic world where natural disasters felt unpredictable and terrifying. Accuracy was never the point, control was. And the cost of believing this story as literal history is not just misunderstanding the past, it is learning to ignore reality when it becomes inconvenient. And once that habit forms, it does not stay confined to ancient stories. The sun stood still. There is a passage where the sun is said to stop moving in the sky so that a battle can continue. Time itself appears to pause, giving one side the advantage it needs to win. It is dramatic, heroic, and presented as unmistakably divine. For generations, this moment has been held up as proof that the laws of nature can be suspended at will, that the universe itself will rearrange to favor the right cause. But astronomy does not bend for narrative. The sun does not move around the Earth. The Earth rotates, creating the illusion of the sun's motion across the sky. To make the sun stand still in a literal sense would require the Earth to stop spinning. And that single idea reveals how impossible this claim truly is. If the Earth's rotation were halted even briefly, the consequences would be catastrophic. The oceans would continue moving at thousands of kilometers per hour, tearing across continents and wiping out everything in their path. The atmosphere would behave the same way, creating winds strong enough to strip the surface of the planet. The delicate balance that allows life to exist would collapse instantly. Nothing would survive. Not armies, not cities, not the storytellers themselves. This was not a miracle. It was a misunderstanding of how the sky works. Ancient people described the world as they experienced it. The sun rose, moved, and set. When a long day felt unusually extended, it made sense to describe it as the sun lingering in place. As poetry, the image works. As metaphor, it is powerful. As physics, it fails completely. The danger begins when poetic language is stripped of its context and treated as literal explanation. What was once a symbolic way of describing victory and divine favor hardens into a factual claim about reality. And when that happens, understanding is replaced by insistence. Questions are no longer welcomed, they are treated as threats. This is where belief crosses a quiet line. Metaphor becomes mandate, story becomes science. And once that transformation occurs, evidence is no longer allowed to speak. The universe must be forced to match the story, no matter how much reality resists. That is why this claim matters. Not because it describes an ancient battle, but because it reveals a pattern. When narratives are valued more than truth, even the sky must be bent to fit them. And when the sky itself is denied, the cost is not just misunderstanding the past, it is learning to reject reality whenever it challenges belief. Disease comes from sin or demons. For much of human history, illness was not understood as biological, it was moral. If you were sick, something was wrong with you in a deeper sense. You were impure, punished, or possessed. Disease was treated as a message, not a mechanism. Pain was interpreted as evidence of guilt, and this belief shaped how people saw themselves and others in moments of extreme vulnerability. This way of thinking gave suffering a terrifying meaning. Illness was not just something that happened to the body, it was something you had earned. Communities learned to fear the sick, not only because of contagion, but because sickness was seen as proof of moral failure. Compassion was conditional. Healing required repentance before relief. And authority thrived in that environment, because fear always strengthens those who claim to control its cause. Then science revealed something radical. Germs do not care about belief. Viruses do not punish behavior. Bacteria do not respond to prayer. They follow physical laws, not moral ones. Disease spreads through contact, environment, and chance. It can affect the virtuous and the cruel in exactly the same way. That realization did more than improve medicine. It quietly dismantled a system that blamed suffering on the sufferer. Once illness was understood as biological, the moral weight shifted. People were no longer sick because they were sinful, they were sick because they were human. And that change altered everything. Treatment replaced judgment. Prevention replaced superstition. Responsibility moved from confession to understanding. But this shift came at a cost for institutions built on fear. If pain was no longer divine punishment, then authority rooted in spiritual threat began to weaken. The power to label someone as cursed or unclean lost its grip, and that made this belief incredibly difficult to let go of. Even today, echoes of it remain. Suffering is still sometimes framed as a test, a lesson, or a consequence, rather than a condition to be addressed. The language has softened, but the implication lingers. Because once you fully accept that pain is not divine judgment, fear loses its leverage. Control becomes harder to justify. And that is why this belief survived for so long. Not because it was true, but because it worked. Humans are the center of the universe. The biblical worldview places humanity at the center of everything. The universe exists for us. The earth is the stage. History is our story. The stars are signs, decorations, or witnesses arranged around a human narrative. This idea did more than explain the cosmos. It gave humanity cosmic importance. It told people their lives mattered not just locally, but universally. Then astronomy delivered a humbling revelation. We are not at the center. The Earth does not sit still while the heavens move around it. We are on a small planet orbiting an average star. That star is one among hundreds of billions in a single galaxy, and that galaxy is one among trillions. The universe did not rearrange itself to place us at the center. We are somewhere on the edge of an unimaginably vast system that does not revolve around human concerns. This was not just a scientific shift, it was an emotional one. Losing the center meant losing certainty. It meant realizing that meaning was not guaranteed by position. For many, this felt like humiliation rather than discovery. Because being central implies being chosen, and being chosen implies authority. When humans stop being the focus of creation, authority based on cosmic importance begins to lose its grip. If the universe is not designed around us, then claims of divine favoritism become harder to defend. The idea that one group speaks for the creator of everything sounds less convincing when everything turns out to be far larger and far more indifferent than imagined. This realization also changed how we see ourselves. Instead of rulers of a specially prepared world, we became participants in a vast, ongoing process. Our survival was not guaranteed. Our dominance was not written into the stars. It had to be earned through understanding and cooperation. And yet, this shift also offered something unexpected. Wonder replaced entitlement. Awe replaced certainty. The universe became more mysterious, not less. It did not shrink. It expanded beyond comprehension. But that expansion came with a price. When humans are no longer the center, stories that rely on cosmic importance begin to feel fragile. Authority must find new foundations. And for some, that loss of centrality felt like an existential threat. Because it is one thing to believe you matter, it is another to accept that you matter without being the center of everything. Thoughts and identity come from the soul, not the brain. For centuries, consciousness was treated as something separate from the body. The soul was believed to think, feel, and choose, while the brain simply carried out instructions. The body was temporary. The soul was the real self. This idea offered comfort, especially in the face of death. If identity lived somewhere beyond flesh, then nothing truly ended. But neuroscience tells a quieter and far stranger story. When scientists began to study the brain directly, they discovered that thoughts do not arrive from elsewhere. They emerge, change the brain, and the mind changes with it, damage a specific region, and memory fades, injure another, and personality shifts. People can lose fear, empathy, impulse control, or even the sense of self they once recognized. These are not rare anomalies, they are consistent patterns. Beliefs can change after a stroke, moral judgment can shift after trauma, a gentle person can become aggressive, a devoted believer can lose conviction. Identity, which once felt solid and eternal, begins to look fragile and dependent on physical structure. The mind does not hover above the body, it is woven into it. This realization is deeply unsettling, because if thoughts, memories, and personality are produced by the brain, then they are vulnerable to damage, decay, and time. They are not separate from biology, they are an expression of it. Consciousness becomes something that happens, not something that arrives. And that leads to a painful question that many people instinctively avoid. If the mind depends on the brain, what happens to certainty about the afterlife? If identity dissolves when the brain is altered, what exactly survives death unchanged? The question does not attack hope, it challenges assumption. This is why the topic makes people uncomfortable, not because neuroscience lacks answers, but because the answers disrupt long-held emotional structures. The idea of an immortal self is deeply intertwined with meaning, justice, and cosmic fairness. Removing that certainty feels like removing the ground beneath your feet. So the question is often pushed aside, not argued against, simply avoided. Because facing it requires reimagining identity, responsibility, and what it means to live a meaningful life without guarantees beyond this one. And once you begin asking it honestly, everything you thought was solid starts to feel provisional. Morality comes only from God. This claim feels foundational to many belief systems. Without divine command, morality collapses. Without God, there is no right or wrong, only chaos. For centuries, this idea has been repeated so often that it feels self-evident. Morality is framed not as something humans develop, but as something handed down. Obedience becomes goodness. Questioning becomes danger. But history tells a very different story. Moral progress has rarely followed religious doctrine. In many cases, it happened directly against it. Slavery was defended with scripture. Women's subordination was justified with sacred texts. Violence, conquest, and punishment were framed as moral duties. These ideas were not fringe interpretations. They were mainstream beliefs supported by religious authority. What changed was not the texts, it was us. Empathy evolved as societies grew more interconnected. Cooperation helped groups survive, thrive, and build trust. As humans learned more about suffering, psychology, and social harm, ethics shifted. Practices once considered normal began to feel intolerable. Not because a verse was rewritten, but because understanding deepened. We did not abandon slavery because ancient words suddenly changed meaning. We abandoned it because we recognized the humanity of those we once dehumanized. We did not reject torture because a commandment updated itself. We rejected it because we understood trauma, cruelty, and irreversible harm. Moral progress followed awareness, not revelation. This realization is unsettling. If morality does not come only from God, then no external authority can carry full responsibility for our actions. We cannot outsource ethics to heaven. We cannot hide behind commands. Responsibility moves inward and outward at the same time, into human judgment, into shared accountability. And that is both terrifying and empowering. Terrifying because it removes certainty. There is no cosmic rulebook guaranteeing we are right. We must think, question, and revise. Empowering because it means morality is alive. It can grow, it can improve, it can respond to real human experience instead of remaining frozen in ancient context. When responsibility belongs to us, excuses disappear. Harm cannot be justified by obedience. Kindness cannot be delayed by doctrine. We become the authors of our values. And once you accept that, morality stops being about fear of punishment. It becomes about care, consequence, and choice. Not because we were told to be good, but because we decided to be. Here's the deeper truth beneath all of this. These claims weren't invented to deceive. They were attempts to explain a mysterious world long before microscopes, telescopes, or modern reasoning existed. The problem isn't that they were wrong. The problem is pretending they still have to be right. Science didn't destroy meaning, it expanded it. It replaced fear with understanding, punishment with causation, mystery with wonder. And questioning these ideas doesn't make you broken. It makes you honest, because truth doesn't fear investigation. It invites it. If this made you rethink what you were taught, if you value truth over comfort, stay curious. Subscribe, and whatever you do, don't stop asking why.